Thank you very much, Kevin. It's not fair that we get the microphones and you didn't. We should have switched this around. But it's a pleasure to be here, specifically back in this building, in fact, where I had the chance to sit down with Ray earlier at a previous event. I'm class of 96 here at the University of Waterloo, so it's also great to be back on campus. This building, of course, wasn't here when I attended, and nor would I have had any business being in this building. I'm an arts grad, a proud one, don't get me wrong, but certainly this goes a little bit beyond what would have got me accepted into this university in the first place. But I'm really pleased to be here, and I am equally pleased to introduce our speakers that will be joining us tonight. I'll begin with Edwin Outwater. I don't think we talked about this. Do we really need introductions for these gentlemen? But Edwin is the Director Laureate of the KW Symphony, and Raymond Laflamme, who is the founding director of IQC. Gentlemen. So we will have time when we are finished with this conversation that I will sort of lead us through to have some questions later on, just so you know. But I thought it would be great to kind of get things started for those who may not know, or even just a little bit of a refresher, how this relationship, this beautiful marriage of quantum and this symphonic quantum relationship happened to come together. How did you guys meet?
Well, I have to turn this on. Yes. There we go. Okay.
What about mine? Yeah,
you have to turn yours on too. So I think we had done the Kitchener-Waterloo Symphony as science-oriented work a few, kind of early on in my time there, which had to do with neuroscience, called Beethoven in Your Brain, and it was a collaboration with Daniel Levitin, who wrote This Is Your Brain on Music, and it went really well, and people started thinking about the symphony as something that could collaborate with scientists. And around that time, this building was coming up, and they thought someone from the IQC, I don't think it was you because I met you later, approached me about...
Mark Peason.
Mark Peason, that's right. Approached us about music for the building. And he was involved in both institutions. And, in that beautiful foyer over there with the stairway and creating some sort of kind of antiphonal work, musicians spread all through. And that was a great idea, and so of course when I want to collaborate with people, the first thing I do is go and talk to them. And a meeting was arranged with Ray and a number of physicists in the old IQC area. And I sat with them for an hour or two, just talking about how music and physics could happen. And it was really, as I expected, because I know physicists often love music and are passionate about it, it was a very engaging conversation from the get-go. And so I was really excited about that. And then something fell through, I believe, in our Intersection series around the same time, something we were planning to do. And I realized that, we can, do this thing for the building, but we actually could just do an Intersections concert. Like, that could be our second science thing. Because it just felt, I was talking about this last week, if you're collaborating with someone, you know like right away, if they're interested, if there's energy, if there's something. And for me, because I collaborate with so many people, if I feel any sort of hesitation or doubt or lack of enthusiasm, like total enthusiasm, then I'm out. I don't want to spend it, because then I have to chase, and spend time trying to get people to work with me. And so this was not one of those cases. I knew it would work. And we met at that first meeting, and then we talked about how can we create a concert about music and physics without having any idea what it would actually be at that point. Yeah.
What was, Ray, what was your initial reaction to this idea of music and physics and the collaboration of the two?
That it was crazy enough to be fun. So I love music. So I always talk to my friends about music, and I like modern classical music, which is a little bit unusual. So people know about my funky tastes. And Mark Peason, that we mentioned a little bit before, who was the chair of the board of the symphony orchestra, said to me, and Mark worked for BlackBerry and he helped IQC in many different ways. He's now the entrepreneur in residence of IQC. And he said to me, you need to meet somebody. There is somebody at the symphony, a guy called Edwin Alwater, that needs to do something. Oh,
It's a groovy beat.
that
I
is
like
funky
it, yeah.
enough.
That was very well timed. We're talking about music. And
So he set up the meeting. And then suddenly I brought a couple of physics system students. Jonathan Barr came, another prof, and then a couple of students. And they said to me, what are we supposed to talk about? And I said, I have no idea. Edwin is going to come. He has a series about intersection between music and something else. We stole your idea about Entangle, by the way. And then
You're welcome.
we got entangled.
Yeah, I like that.
And so I said, he's thinking about something with quantum physics and music. And suddenly you came, we started to chat about different things. We started to talk about physics, about music, about places where there could be some intersection. We had some crazy ideas about there are some ideas or concepts that happens in society which are both reflected in science and in music or arts. And when I say this to people, the first thing they look at me and says, what? And I give them a first example. If I think about Newton's laws, everything is well defined. It's like going down a river and you turn, you don't know exactly where the river will go, but the flow is going smoothly. I think of Mozart. And the two goes incredibly well together. You go a little bit later in time and you realize that at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, music was in a revolution. The atonal movement were kind of asking questions about the foundations of music, and in physics we're talking about the foundations of physics. They were experiments that we could see, we can look at the results, but there was no theories that could explain them. And that was the early time of quantum mechanics. So there's more, and as the evening will come, I'll give more examples of this, but there was this relationship between music and physics, and that's what we started to explore.
what was the closest, Edwin, you had come to an intersection like this in your series? I mean, the leap was going to physics a real leap?
Well, every concert is a leap. So I think it was, as I mentioned, the second science concert. I thought this was going to be hard to do. And the thing that kind of drew me in, I was thinking about this, is that, talking about art and science, is that what I did know about quantum physics is that I couldn't possibly know about it. You know, in a certain sense, that the deeper you get it, like there's this saying for quantum physics, if you think you understand it, like in your mind, you don't. And so go on. And so you know, you're trying to find answers through science. But certainly right now, there are these paradoxes that exist in just that even, you know, anyone in this room could think about, like a Zen, you know, koan, or like a riddle that is unsolvable or contradicts itself. And of course, in music or any form of art, that's where you want to get, you know, that a work of art, poetry is what can't be translated, music points to a mix of emotions or ideas that is so specific and sublime, or so open-ended, could be interpreted in so many ways, and yet it means something to everyone. There are lots of paradoxes in art that kind of define art as being art. And so that's what it kind of drew me in, you know. And the great thing is you can't describe in words sometimes what's happening in quantum. And in that first conversation, I was talking about music, and I said, look, I don't really understand this, but does this feel quantum to you? Because I thought rather than explaining or reading a book about it, feeling the visceral kind of mystery of a musical piece, like in your nervous system, might approximate what you know, just the feeling of thinking about these things or experiencing about it. And that I felt was my way into the concert, of trying to make it. Like, actually, the most confusing thing was the most helpful thing. That the paradox of of quantum physics must have something to do with artistic paradoxes, and can they inform each other? And that kind of what happened anyway.
And these words about, can you feel it,
I was about to ask, I mean, how do you feel quantum, right?
resonated incredibly well with me because about 10 years ago, we had a visitor who came to Waterloo, Brian Eno. He's the songwriter for U2 and composer. And he came to Waterloo, and for some reason he wanted to do something with quantum or learn about quantum. He shows up in my office as director of IQC, and I had funny experience as director of IQC, but that the music composer shows up and knock at the door and say, I want to learn about quantum, and I say, what I'm gonna say? And the funny thing is, I go on the blackboard and explain the two-slit experiments and how quantum works, and we go in the lab and we come back and he says, I want to take a picture of you in front of the board. I look at him and I said, hey, I should be the one taking a picture of you in front of the board and show this to my kids. He says, well, that's what I'm doing. I'm going to show this to my daughter. She always asks me what I do when I go around the world. But he asked me one question, which I had never thought about. I'm good with equations. I can understand how to turn them into an experiment. But I never asked myself this question of, in quantum mechanics, we have this property of being in superposition. So quantum objects can be here and there at the same time, something which is we're not used to in the classical world. Your car is at one place. Your keys of your car, you think they are at one place. But in the quantum world, they can be here and there at the same time. Electrons, atoms, particles of light can be here and there at the same time. You can be in superposition. So Brian and Eno, we were walking together in the parking lot. He says, what would you feel if you would be in a superposition? So I said to him, well, I can describe what it would be like through equations, but I don't know what it would feel. And so I look at the audience, there's a few physicists, the other ones I'll try to explain what it means. You wouldn't feel it. You cannot feel being in superposition. You can understand where you're starting from, where you end up. You'll describe your path in a way which sounds totally crazy, but you cannot feel being in the middle. But all of this came because of this artist who came and asked me a question. So when the relationship with Edwin started and developed, these are the kind of things I wanted to see. Can we think about quantum physics in a very, very different way? A way where we can feel things, a way where we can understand concepts from a different point of view.
Did you, Edwin, have to think about music in a different way?
Yes. It totally changed the way I think about music. I mean, or it added another, no, I wouldn't say it did change, and it added another set of perception and approach to music that I still use constantly. So yeah, it was definitely more. You know, I walked away with a lot from having gone through the process.
So
especially for weird music. So
how does the creative process then begin when you're taking this marriage of music and physics? Where does the creative process begin for this piece of music?
Well, there's a missing link. Who's Colin Hunter, who wrote the script with me. So I actually wrote a script. And so the way things developed the way they develop, and the way they developed to me was that this should basically be like a radio show, live. And in fact, even when it happened visually, we had a reader, with almost on a stool reading a script, and it was a dark room. So it was kind of like a live radio play. Because we ended up actually telling a story. The story about, the one thing we thought was crazy was that the history of the fact that music history and the history of physics had this huge explosion point in the early 20th century, that there are these parallels between Mozart and the Enlightenment thinking and Newtonian physics, and the breakdown of that. And then the timelines are weirdly similar, which I still don't understand. That when Einstein discovered, when Lord Kelvin said there's nothing new to be learned, and then Einstein said, wait, this isn't right. This metal is not changing the right color. That was right around Schoenberg and Stravinsky blowing up, the common language of music, Western classical music. So why? I mean, we might talk about that later tonight. I mean, that's a big question. But why? But it was a big cultural shift. And so that story became the first half of the program, getting to quantum and getting the audience set up. And then the second half became kind of how music was inspired by God for many composers for hundreds of years who wrote masses and symphonies and, Gregorian chant. There are composers now who are inspired by science and the mysteries of science. And we gave a few examples of that in the 20th century. And we played some really weird music by Henry Brant, John Cage, and Yanis Xenakis. So that's just how it turned out. And so Ray and I talked a lot, and I learned from Ray, and Colin wrote the script with me, and then Ray presented. And your role in the first concert was kind of to stand up and respond. We left these open moments for Ray to stand up and respond to what we were talking about, which he stole the show, I would say. It's really fun.
Flattery will bring you
Yes.
everywhere.
Yes.
Was there a point, Ray, because I'm just going to assume here, Edwin, and forgive me, but that you probably wouldn't question Ray's theories when it comes to physics and quantum. Did you question Edwin's direction in music?
No, because what I was really curious about was how a composer comes with new ideas and compose. Where does this creation comes from? I can see it from physicists also are creative people. But the inspiration of the creation comes from looking at the world around us and trying to ask questions where our understanding has not been explained. And then suddenly find, there's a gap in our understanding here. Can we go and do something to understand it? Do we have to change the equation to understand this, or do we have to push the equation in a new direction to understand this new phenomena? So inspiration by nature, inspiration by the mathematics that's there, and trying to push it in a different way. But these gives you some kind of constraint in the creation process of how to move forward. How does a composer get this creative process? So in some sense, I was looking at Edwin and trying to figure out what he does take. And some things that he takes, something that he abandons, and then comes with something new. And that was what I was curious about.
I envision the two of you sitting together with an instrument, maybe a piano. I think I saw some video.
This is
that.
getting to the piece, the symphony, which just happened.
Right.
So we're moving maybe from the concert to the piece we wrote last year, right?
For the creative process, right? How this was, you worked on it together, your collaboration, right?
We should explain what happened. Yeah. So that concert happened, the physics concert, and this is kind of the new thing that because Ray and I worked kind of indirectly, but closely in the quantum physics concert that we've been describing up to this point. I thought, what if we actually collaborated on a work, and I really talked to him directly, and rather than writing a script or a story, we wrote a piece, and that was where we started really interacting, and this was played last spring, my final Intersections concert. And so that piece started with the question, well, we agreed to do that. And then we started with the question, what would a quantum symphony sound like? And then we really dug in.
To which I laughed at first because I said, what it would sound like, I don't know, but you wouldn't be able to feel it if it's entangled.
Right.
And then the discussion came in. How would we do this? How would you have a piece of feeling of this entanglement in there? How would you do this? And then he would balance question. He says, is this the right thing, the right type of concepts for entanglement or superposition? And I would say, yes, this is going in the right direction. Oh, this kind of is not the right thing. There are places where I had no idea how you could express that concept, that idea, to music, and you would try one thing after the other, and I would say, yes, no, yes, no.
But, music or any art is meant to represent something. And it can represent, if it can represent God or heaven or whatever, it can represent these mysteries too. So, and also if you learn, we're still human beings, we have to learn about these things. So if the double slit experiment, you look at, if you look at any basic book, you can see pictures or ideas that technical artists come up with or authors come up with to try to begin to describe these ideas. And so that was kind of my inspiration, because some of those drawings of what entanglement might be, or like something like Schrödinger's cat, which is such a poetic idea, which everyone knows about, a cat which may be alive or dead in a box, to get you these thought experiments. Maybe my piece could be a thought experiment, not the answer, not hard science, but like those beautiful diagrams or attempted explanations or initial explanations of these complicated things that in themselves can be very beautiful. I always thought double slit pictures were beautiful with the lines and the waves, going through, and the cat, of course. So that's kind of how it started. And so I wasn't trying to be too ambitious, but there would be a sense of, would it feel right? And he was my guide to that, in doing it. So I'd play sketches for him, and of course, you try to create the structure, the framework, and it had to have randomness, it had to have superposition, it had to have entangledness, it had to have an excited and unexcited state, various things that we agreed would take place in the piece. And then, so some ideas, if you're entangling particles, you want someone on stage and off stage. Like that, you have to, Now, like you said, are they in two places at once? Well, no, but it starts to make you think about it. And it had to have randomness. And then it had to sound like a piece of music somehow. To people. So if it were completely garbled, it wouldn't make any sense. But it does get pretty garbled. Yeah.
But it had to maintain then, musically, a certain structure.
Yeah, and what's really funny is the musical structure is like the most simple musical structure. It's just an arch form. It just goes, it starts out very calm and it gets really complex and then it goes back. And it just, so there is that very simple idea for any listener, that any listener could sense the momentum of the piece in a very kind of primal way, that it goes from there to here to there.
You mentioned structure.
Yeah.
That brings me to randomness when there's no structure. And one of the concepts that I mentioned earlier on, where there's a parallel between physics and music, is around the 1940s, 1950s. An American composer called John Cage composed with really random events. He would turn the radio and look at the noise in the radio and use this as an input of his compositions. And there are parts of it which are totally random. And randomness is something that doesn't make you very comfortable. Like usually we listen to music to relax because it's kind of sounding nice, like the Mozart. You have something which is totally random. You just cannot sit down and listen to this usually. And this is a parallel to what was the beginning of quantum mechanics. Up to quantum mechanics, people believed that everything was really predictable. If you knew where the particles would start from, and you used Newton's law, you know exactly where they will end up. You need to know where they start from, their velocity. You use Newton's equation, and you know where they end up, and what is the final velocity. And everything can be predictable if you really know the initial conditions. In quantum mechanics, there are events which are fundamentally unpredictable. And this is, for us scientists and physicists, kind of really puzzling. And this turn again was at the turn of the century that we realized that our fundamental theories had some piece of randomness in it, which we cannot explain, we cannot predict. And so composers use same kind of things at roughly the same amount of time.
Does that make you then uniquely suited to collaborating on a piece like this because of that unpredictability, that randomness?
Yeah, we are unpredictable
Yeah,
sometimes.
he knows a lot about it. But here's a funny thing that I've learned as a musician, is jazz musicians improvise, make things up on the spot. Musicians, to get musicians to play in a random manner requires work. Kind of like it's hard to find a real random number that's truly random,
Yeah.
which is it's a long story. I mean,
Yeah.
you can explain it better than I can, but they're not as common as you think. And so human beings our brains are pattern detectors and pattern creators. And to survive in this world, we are constantly creating order out of things and assessing things and categorizing things. Like dangerous animal, mother, this is what we're doing all the time. And in fact, that's how we sort out music. That we hear these patterns, and even in a very complex symphony, we're looking for what's the same thing. And what I found in getting musicians to play in a random manner is that they will immediately start playing patterns to themselves. They'll kind of go, da, 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 da. They'll go back to the same thing. And they think they're being random, but random is more like, dup, ba-da-da-ba. Like that's random. So more random. And so to get people to do that, it's to make them even understand that they can do that. Make a weird sound and space it out differently, or not play their instrument and just sit there and do nothing for 30 seconds and play one note. That's what Cage really wanted. That's what, I was working on this again last week with Yo-Yo Ma with Chicago, getting kids to play. There's this composer, Golyav, wrote a piece with shooting stars at the end of it. And in the score, it just goes, brr, brr, brr. I was like, that's not good. And I knew from Yo-Yo it's okay to change it for this composer. And so we created a totally different sound world at the end of this piece, which is supposed to be exploding stars, and it was really fun, but it involved that same kind of set of possibilities. But think about what you do that's truly random, but it's an amazing revelation. It's reassuring actually how pattern oriented we are.
Which is not your teenage kids.
Yeah, they have their patterns too. Right?
What do you have to do, Ed, when coming to a piece of work like this? I'm trying to think of, obviously you had already experienced through intersections a variety of different ways of composing. But do you have to just clear your mind, take away all of the constructs that you've based pieces of music on before, completely clean slate? Not at all.
No, I think, you want it to sound like music still. So, the key is there was an aha moment. So we were talking about how to create random events, the events of the piece itself would have this arc progression. And to me, it's like, okay, you hear one thing, you hear another thing reacting with it. Various times things become more excited, they become entangled. Like the offstage people start playing along. They start playing different things along, then they start playing at the same time, which is entanglement, from a distance. And so for me, I put myself in the audience's perspective or my own perspective. The sense of wonder and mystery should increase. So using these things. And in fact, you decided what order to put things in. And maybe for the same reason or maybe not. I don't know. Why did you choose the order of regular, excited, superposition, entanglement,
So it followed the history of quantum mechanics.
So history, yeah. So what was discovered? But again, each one was to me cooler than the last, so I was happy with that.
Put a little order in the randomness.
Yeah.
We talk about randomness and things which are random, which are again, makes us feel uncomfortable, all this. But what I've learned in the last 10 years of science, and thank you to my computer science colleagues, is randomness is useful. Can we turn it and use it sometimes? And in fact, composers have done this, and I'll come back to them, but first I'll talk about the science part. Do we use randomness sometimes? Have you seen randomness being used? And you've all seen it behind the scene. Polling. If you want to poll a population, and let's say we want to poll for election purposes, then obviously if you go and poll in Alberta or in Quebec, you'll get different results. So if you don't choose the people you want to poll randomly, you'll have a bias. So randomness becomes very useful to erase the bias that you have to do certain things. Another place where randomness has been incredibly useful to all of you, Darwin's evolution principle. Thing starts, and there's mutations which are random, and the strongest one of the living creatures survives and gets better. So randomness can be turned into a tool. First, something which was scary. When I go to the lab and my students tell that the result is random, or they get this random noise comes in, it's not very happy, and you have to go and try to clean it up. But when you really start to understand it, maybe you can use it in different ways. And it turns out in the work I've done in the last 10 years, I've used randomness to kind of get rid of the things which were biased to get a result which is really unbiased. So you can use this. And it turns out that composers in the 1960s, Yanis Xenakis, that Edwin mentioned a little bit earlier, use randomness in some of his compositions. And suddenly you start to use randomness for a purpose. And it turns out that is what quantum computing is about. There's a slightly different types of randomness that leads to entanglement, and you can use it to give you an extra power to compute. And that, to me, is mind-boggling, that suddenly these concepts goes in these different world, the arts world, the science world, but suddenly they try to express the same thing. Randomness is a powerful tool.
So he loves randomness, obviously, and I've learned to love it more.
Was it hard?
But what?
Was it hard to learn to
No,
love?
I generally love crazy stuff like that. But it was one funny thing. One of the big problems of, and we should talk about the piece, I guess, in this part, how it's put, because we're gonna have some video and things like that. But I thought, how do we randomly activate the groups of musicians? And so we had talked about, since they would be at different places in the room, creating with a computer a random number generator that would signal them to do things like that. And then the person who was helping me put together, who was a very skilled guy, was just having problems working that out. And then I said, can we do, and he suggested to me, why don't we just pre-choose the random numbers? And then the musicians won't know anyway. They won't know till the concert that it's happening. And so it's just as good. And I said, I'll just ask Ray about that. And I think that's even on the video. I think there's a video of that, like, because this conversation, they filmed, the IQC filmed a working session, which you can find online with us at the piano and talking about the piece as it is being, I was presenting him some sketches and stuff. But I gave him that, he said, absolutely not. And I was kind of like, crap, okay, how are we gonna do this? And then I remembered a quote from our show of the conversation between Albert Einstein and Niels Bohr. And Einstein believed that there was some order in all of this, randomness he was coming across. And he said, to Bohr, God doesn't play dice. And Bohr said, don't tell God what to do. But I remember the idea of course, what is more random than rolling a die? And once I got this idea of, that was the big eureka thing for me in this conceptually, is it's an iconic thing to do. It's old, it's new, it's permanent. It's actually way more interesting than watching a number come up on a screen. Everyone's done it, so there's a connection there to people, and so the piece became activated by dice, and because there's 6 sides of a die, there became 6 groups of instruments. So actually, that shape caused me to choose groups of instruments, and then once I had the dice idea, it was easy. And so now we'll start talking about each group of instruments. Since there are 6, I kind of chose each group of instruments to represent something, at least to me personally. So there's a big thing the strings do, which is kind of a modern version of a Bach chorale. It's kind of 4-part, 4 voices kind of moving. There's a Gregorian chant idea in the woodwinds, an old linear idea. There's a percussion woodblock thing, which signifies to me just the passing of time or the warping of time. There's a bassoon thing, which is just Stravinsky, because I love Stravinsky. And then there's a trumpet thing, which it's kind of in a different key and kind of not Gregorian chant, but more of a romantic melody. And so those became the 6 elements of music that form the piece, the 6 groups. And then the die roll gets them to either start or stop. And the color, then we had to, different things happened. So, we had a few different colors of dice as well. That made it work. And that became and I've never heard of anyone doing it this way. So I felt actually, there are a lot of process pieces. So John Cage has been doing that for a long time. The Fluxus movement in the late 60s, people like Yoko Ono were super into this kind of idea of a piece. But this was I thought, oh, that's kind of cool, it relates. And wasn't like no one had written a piece like this before, but no one had written a piece exactly like this before. So I was kind of happy about that in the sense of doing it. And Ray is my guide. He was the inspiration of putting the piece together, and the structure and what had to happen. He said what had to happen, and I had to create the piece out of that. And then I edited. We would go back and forth. And he would act as kind of a commentator or responder to what I was working on.
How did you feel about the dice?
Much better than setting things up in advance. Edwin a little bit earlier mentioned that it's very hard to get totally random things. And initially we had thought about, I should back up a little bit and say, however, we do know some things are really random quantum events. So maybe we could have a quantum random number generator on the spot. But then this is very abstract. It's hidden behind or in a box, and suddenly some number comes in. So I think the dice is a very good thing. As Edwin mentioned, everybody has rolled the dice. So everybody can relate to that part. Everybody can think about being part of that piece. So that was good.
Do you want to look at some of it?
Would love to.
So I'm taking my phone out because this is where my notes are. I'm not texting people. Don't worry. But the 2 things I could say, let's see if I can quickly do this. I'm reading the performance directions. So there are notes that people played, and then they got a list of directions, which I can read in 1 minute. Sections A and B repeat in a loop, start with conductor, this for strings. The music changes based on rolls of dice. Your number is 1. So every time the number 1 comes up, the strings do something. That's their assigned number. They're that side of the die. Blue roll, when your number hits, on stage players begin section A. We bring out a white die. When your number hits, on stage players begin section B. When your number hits again, on stage players improvise material based on section B. So section A is just the calm version. Section B is an excited version of the same music, so it's the same notes but more agitated. And then there's the random. So it's normal, quote unquote, excited random that we escalate to through that series of rolls. Orange roll, when your number hits, off-stage players improvise material from section B. So maybe a superposition idea. So this is when the piece is completely noisy. Because not only is everyone improvising, but then people from off stage start improvising. So we're at the top of the arc at that point. Red roll, when your number hits, on stage players begin section A and off stage players begin section B. So there's a kind of, that's entanglement. It's more ordered interaction from a distance. If number hits again, on stage and off stage players switch sections. So it's almost the same. It should be really exactly the same, right? Blue roll, when your number hits, both on stage and off stage players play section A. There's real entanglement, like exactly at the same time. When your number hits, again, both on stage and off stage players stop playing. So it begins with just the players on stage, but the calmness at the end is the entangled players playing together, which I always thought was such a beautiful and amazing idea. So that's the path. And then here's what it looked like. I'll just show you slide 1. You could do part 1 at this point. And then I'll kind of talk about it. You guys, yeah, here it comes. That's not me. This is like the 4-part weird Bach chorale idea. Also very Stravinsky influenced. And it loops, it just keeps repeating. So now number 5 is going to come in, and that is trumpets are number 5. So they were just activated. Thank you. So I'm rolling the dice, and my assistant conductor, Daniel, was conducting. And they just keep repeating. So it's like a loop, which is also very kind of, that's a very 21st century, like so much of music is loops now. Your kids are listening to loops constantly. But that, I couldn't find another way to do it without looping. You know, maybe I will in the future. Here's the white roll, I think. Going from a non-excited to, you'll hear the bassoons start playing something and you'll hear the music change. Listen to the bassoon. That bop bop. So they just changed right there to a busier thing. There's the woodblock. Trumpets just got more excited. Yeah. So the other random part is how long do I wait between each dice roll? That's up to me. Makes you feel like God, I guess.
But you're not random.
Yeah. But I tried to, you know, if it sounded good, I moved on. If I wanted to like dig in, I waited. This is
that doesn't sound random.
Yeah, I know. Well, it's, you know, all art is a kind of lying. This is off stage. Oh, and because not everyone could see the dice, you know, one of the funniest things that happened is, of course, most of the people on stage couldn't see the screen where the dice were being shown, which is crazy. So Daniel, the conductor, used hand signals for the number, which you saw him doing, and then we actually changed the lighting on him to reflect the color of the dice. That was like the last like ridiculous problem we had with this piece. So you'll see a color change from orange to red, and yeah, here's the next. I get it. Now it's crazy. There's a color change. Yeah. Off stage. You can kind of see them up there. Yeah, there they are off stage looking down to the on stage. Off stage strings. Now he's red. Anyway, but you see the offstage players up in the balcony, so every onstage has an offstage twin. I forgot one side of the dice, the French horns. Did I mention that? I didn't. They play just a drone, which is very important in music too. So it's chorale, chant, time, tick-tock, drone, melody, like romantic melody and Stravinsky. Those are the 6 parts. And then here's the end. And of course, you never know how the piece begins or how it ends because the beginnings kind of turn on and off the players. And so I always get excited. And I do admit that I like some things, endings better than others. This was not my favorite ending, but it was okay. He's blue now. They became unexcited now, the strings calmed down. So just strings, bassoons, and horns are left. Someone's gonna get turned off. Bassoons just got turned off. That turns off the strings, the 1. Remember we said 1 was. Then I keep rolling till I can turn the horns off till their number hits, which also creates a time delay, you know. There's your drone sound. So I'm frantically rolling to shut them up. And that's it. Huh? Yeah, so yeah. So all in all, the piece was about 9 minutes, I think. We kind of kept it to run about, that's how long we discovered that it took. If you hear some really weird music, well, that was kind of like, you know, there is thought that goes into even the strangest things and into the most chaos. I mean, a lot of thought. So I became very interested in this idea, and I probably will like keep experimenting with this and refine it. And we talked about quantum symphony. I called it a quantum etude, because it's just a little piece, and it will, I want it. There's more work to do before I would ever call it a symphony. But it's and the title is "Does God Play Dice?" But with no question mark. Also intentional. Yes.
I have to say, and I don't know about those of you in the audience, but I feel it a tiny bit like a magician has just revealed his secrets here. Because I watched this 4 or 5 times before getting together here tonight for this conversation. And having you direct it from this chair, Edwin, changes everything. Everything makes so much more sense.
That probably means it's not a very good piece. Because, and that's what I mean, that actually, if you heard it without it, you get something out of it, especially the arc. But you want to leave the mystery there a little bit. And I think if I got better at writing that piece, that idea, there would be more, maybe there wouldn't be as much magicianship, but maybe there would be. I don't know. You're not the only person who gave me that comment, afterwards. Is they didn't know. I think some people didn't know why I was rolling the dice, even. So I think it's fun to explain the game sometimes, and in music you can do that too. In fact, if you listen to music, and you listen to a sonata form, or if you read a sonnet, and you know how a sonnet works in poetry, you know the game that is being played. And then you know how it's reaffirmed or departed from. And because we're creating a new structure and a new process here, there is a sense of just going blind into it, because you don't know what the game is. you know. So, in fact, or if you listen to a rock song, you know there's a verse, a chorus, you know, bridge, verse, chorus, you know. So creating the game, making the game a little bit more clear, you know, is not, I don't think that's actually necessarily bad. So, good point. Yeah, exactly, right? So,
How does it make you feel?
So when I listen to Edwin, I can go through all, yes, the explanation, but I much prefer to listen to it without any of these explanations and try to understand exactly what it feels. And it definitely takes me, the end to me is really kind of, indeed, I understand the idea of going back to a ground state of low energy and kind of calming down after a lot of things having happened.
Well, and that calming down at the end, absolutely, because there was that randomness is a word we've used a lot here, absolutely in the full piece. But there's a frantic pace in there of some sort too, exactly. And that arc is absolutely there. It's
Yeah.
absolutely there. It's wonderful. It's wonderful.